I do just want to start by acknowledging the community health workers in the room. The work that you all do, especially anymore, is increasingly difficult. I've seen it in my own family. We have a little one who did 3 months worth of remote last year because he got a TikTok about how someone was going to shoot his school up. So I completely see and understand and really respect the work that you all do, and I'm immensely grateful for it. But then just kind of getting into the presentation, so how to leverage data to tell stories. To give you a little bit of background into who we are as an organization, so we were incubated inside of a not-for-profit back in 2005. So we've grown up a ton since then. We did spin off into a for-profit in 2018. I joined the company in 2019 when we were just literally a small team of technical folks working in the basement of that not-for-profit that still owns a good percentage of the platform today. But all that being said, when we think about things like product roadmap and what we want to be able to deliver to our customers, a lot of this is around storytelling. So taking things like as simple as even case management notes or progress notes, or if you're doing service planning, things like that, are there pieces of data in there somewhere where we can tell a story about outcomes or a lack of resources, which I heard mentioned a little bit earlier? Because that's one of the things too, is it does seem to be kind of a never-ending cycle. Hopefully we do see the end of these things one day. But ultimately we want to be able to make sure that we're positioning ourselves well for what might be next. Next slide, please. So that's just the states where we have a presence. And I will say we are based in Kansas City, so just a short drive through a monsoon this morning to make it to you folks. And then this is honestly just a checkpoint to help me with my nerves. I do have the sweetest little baby girl in the world. That's my wife, Olivia. She's a therapist. But all that being said, I was raised in a family where philanthropy was really, really important. We didn't have a lot of money. And so what that meant was usually volunteering on holidays, things like that. At least once a month, we were like making garlic toast in homeless shelters, things like that. So I'm extremely grateful for that and being brought up in that environment. I think that it's really helped me today with CCL. But again, I can't emphasize enough, this is really just an excuse for me to see a picture of my daughter and my wife, who will be the recipients of my note, by the way. Next slide, please. So just to tee up the agenda, thinking about this from the perspective of framing the narrative, beginning to connect the dots, putting that data into action, and that's where I'll actually show you some examples. And I will say, one example that I did leave out is the work that you all are doing because I don't want to spoil it for Chase. So we've talked a lot about that kind of data, but I did bring some others. Understanding that right now you all obviously are employed through school districts, but in a world where maybe your next employment opportunities with like a true non-for-profit where they're doing residential services or something like that, I do want to just bring kind of a unique perspective to some of those other sectors where folks work within the social safety net. And then what's next with artificial intelligence? I will preface this by saying I'm a big believer that AI is like the king of brain rot for children. So for me, when I think about artificial intelligence, it's more about the prompts that AI can help you with, and then assign the critical thought after maybe AI has given you a starting point. Next slide, please. Next slide. So begin with the end in mind. So this is a saying that we always start out with whenever we begin an implementation as a company. And really what that means is there's really nothing terribly fun about case management tools or closing referral platforms. It's all just kind of a part of the work. So for us, it's making sure that if you are going to engage in these processes, if you are going to document in this way, let's make sure that at the end of the day, we can tell a compelling story and ultimately give data back to the funders that require it. So when we say begin with the end in mind, really what that means is if you are going to be asking questions of your funders, or if your funders are going to be asking questions of you at the end of the grant cycle, let's make sure that we're incorporating those types of questions into the narrative as we're service planning, things like that. So what kinds of stories can social care data tell? We've talked about success stories. I will say being on the last call for this group and seeing some of the great strides that you all are seeing with the self-sufficiency questionnaire is really, really inspiring. So being able to show longitudinal growth over time, and then capacity constraints or unmet needs. And that can often tie directly to a lack of resource availability, especially in rural parts of the country. And then who is our intended audience? So I will say, and I'll kind of tee this example up towards the end with payers and Medicare and Medicaid agencies being a good example of what the next audience could look like. As this conversation around health-related social needs or social determinants of health is kind of bubbling to the surface, and knowing that payers are engaged in this conversation, how can we tell them a compelling story or even use, in this case, artificial intelligence to actually tie codes to your service provision so it speaks in the language that they're used to receiving paperwork in, if you will. Next slide. So success stories. We talked a little about this, but improved self-sufficiency questionnaire scores, which you all are doing amazing. I've seen the scoring and it's really, again, very inspiring. Long-term recovery stories, so we do work a lot within the substance use disorder community, so being able to show kind of soup to nuts from the initial encounter with an individual, even if it's like a referral from a local hospital or local safety net hospital or local safety net provider, where did that story end, and then where did that story begin, and then now where does that story end? Or the types of things that we look at data for. Then Medicaid and Medicare enrollment, so often working in environments where kiddos or families are not enrolled in Medicaid or Medicare, but they are eligible for those services. So being able to actually get them enrolled so that they don't have such hesitation around going and seeing a provider and having their health needs met. And then capacity constraints. One of the things that it's not always fun, but we really encourage any users of CCL to do is when you do run into roadblocks like that, like maybe you search a resource guide and you don't see any resources, often for transportation is a huge one. Document that unmet need or that lack of resource, because that's going to become tied into the story that you might tell a funder in your next grant cycle. Like, hey, we have these 1, 2, 3 downstream issues. One of those is that our kiddos haven't seen a dentist or a doctor in 6 years. And a lot of that can be tied directly to transportation. So being able to tell that story, if we're able to solve this kind of upstream of issue of transportation, or lack of transportation rather, we might be able to address some of the downstream concerns, like these children haven't seen a dentist or a doctor in 5 or 6 years. Next slide, please. And then beginning to connect the dots. So where is the data coming from? So this could be coming from, and it really depends on the setting for which you work. Obviously, some of you all are using Community CareLink, which is kind of a social care electronic medical record, but some folks are working in hospitals, so they have products like Epic or Cerner, social care records like CCL, case management, Excel spreadsheets, and even a piece of paper. Really, wherever you are today, begin to document all these things so that at the end of the day, you do have a compelling story to tell. And there, like kind of to that point, there are levels to data capture. And so really what that means is starting on a piece of paper is often where we meet a lot of the organizations that we work with, truly. So a lot of the organizations that do use CCL are small nonprofits. And what that means is a lot of them are used to documenting Excel spreadsheets, or even just like a physical notebook where they're writing information, which I will say, please don't write down protected information inside of a physical piece of paper that you keep on your desk and not under lock and key, but we see that stuff all the time. And then ultimately, just make sure that you begin with the end in mind. So whatever tools you're going to be using to document, just make sure that you're putting in the back of your head, what story do I want to tell as a part of this data capture? Because the last thing you want to do is capture data for the sake of capturing data, because all that's going to do is upset you at the end of the day. Next slide, please. As you implement processes and systems, make sure you're asking all the right questions along the way. So this is a big one wherein we engage with a lot of clients at the beginning of a grant cycle, for example. And then what they end up doing is coming to us at the end of a quarter, scrambling and saying, hey, we're actually supposed to be capturing this data for the last 3 months. And so for us, the anecdote is always, well, let's not do that again. But please be thinking through the types of data that your funders are going to want to deliver to you, or are wanting you to deliver to them, or rather, again, the story that you want to be able to tell at the end of a quarter, at the end of a year, things like that. Next slide, please. And then these are just a few examples. So thinking through, these folks are actually, they're one of my favorite clients. They're called Amethyst Place. They're in Kansas City, Missouri. They house women who are either expecting a baby or have a baby with the goal of reunifying as a result of a deunification that was incited by substance use disorder. So for them, when they initially engaged with us, it was really just a very generic need of, hey, we feel like we need to grow and improve our processes and strengthen all of that. And then from there, as we kind of got those basics buttoned up, we began to show them how to do service planning inside the system, how to connect their families to other local resources through the resource guide, things like that, how to begin to tell that story. They brought us kind of an interesting challenge. But before we get to that, we're able to pull out of their data are all those wonderful dots that you see there. So increasing average length of stay by 26% year over year. So enhanced chance of graduation, achieving an 86% child reunification rate, which is really, really amazing. And then 98% of their moms sustain or re-engage in recovery. And then 90% of graduates that are still sustainably housed today. So that's really, really awesome. And I can't encourage you enough, go to Amethyst Place's website and check them out, because they're just wonderful thought leaders. They're really, really amazing people. Next slide. And then as they came to us and we're getting ready to kick off a capital improvements campaign, one of the things that's well known in Kansas City is there just aren't enough recovery beds. And then there really aren't enough recovery beds as you get into specific nuances, like women who are being referred out of, like, for example, Children's Mercy has a TIES program. So for women who are in, not yet in recovery, but want to go into the recovery process, who are pregnant with a child. And so for them, understanding the nuance, and they really only take referrals from specific sources, and even from those specific sources, they are bombarded with need. And so for us, it was a simple ask of begin to document your waiting list electronically and begin to document anyone that falls off of that waiting list. And so the accumulation of their data, and all credit goes to them. Also, I 100% just lost my footing on my left foot, so sorry about that. So the accumulation of all of that data really was like even thinking through what their case notes look like, and then doing some discovery through back-end systems where you can just take free text and pull out anecdotes, things like that. They were able to successfully complete their capital improvements campaign and had a building with 32 additional beds for mothers in recovery. So that's one thing that's huge in terms of what does a positive outcome look like, going from just capturing data to being able to tell a story to being able to open 32 new units for women in recovery. And then Epic. So this is another really interesting program. So this one runs all across the state of Missouri. For them, it is essentially a SAMHSA-funded program wherein anyone who experiences an overdose, irregardless of where they're physically located across the entire state, is met bedside at the provider where they were sent to by a peer support specialist, where they're offered localized resources for where they need to be sent after their overdose. So in Missouri, we have the Lake of the Ozarks. In a lot of cases, what we can actually map out are people that go and party in the Ozarks, they experience an overdose, maybe they live in St. Louis or Kansas City. And so for them, what ends up happening is we take all of that data, we consolidate it into a client record, and we actually refer that person into their localized geography so that they have a better chance of sustained recovery. Because I think, probably preaching to the choir here, but in a world wherein they're partying in the Ozarks, they're experiencing overdose, they decide as a result of that overdose they do want to engage in the recovery process, great, there's a bed for you in the Ozarks. Is not really all that helpful. And so for this specific program, there were a lot of HIPAA challenges, even thinking through getting local providers all across the state, which in some cases are really, really small settings of recovery. A lot of them are off 70 highway and they might have 5-6 beds in an old motel, things like that. Getting those folks to engage in a 24-hour program was a challenge. And so what Epic came to us, and if you can go to the next slide, please. They actually wanted to go through all of their calls and be able to deliver a report to these small recovery providers where they had gaps and say, we promise you probably aren't gonna get calls outside of working hours. And so it was simple as that. We literally ran a report and showed those localized providers the bulk of calls do come in during normal business hours because a lot of them, again, just didn't feel as though they were set up to engage in a 24-hour program. And so being given this data, they did see a pretty drastic uptick and people taking on the funding associated with the EPIC program and then ultimately being the recipients of client data, and for folks that are coming and actually staying in their beds and engaging in their recovery process. Next slide, please. And then this is just like a swath of data that we were able to receive from them and pull directly out of CCL. But one of the things that's really cool is on the community referral side of things, they did 25,000 referrals last year with a 50% closed loop rate. That means that 50% of people who engaged in recovery and said, yes, I would like some localized resources, actually went and at least had one initial meeting with a peer support specialist at that resource. So that's a pretty impressive number, and again, all the credit goes to the EPIC program. They're amazing, they do really, really good stuff, and they really meet people where they're at. And then the next challenge for us at CCL with the EPIC program is we want to be able to tell a story to their funder, which is the federal government, how more people engaging in recovery can also tie to a reduction in cost of care. So what that means is actually pulling in health information exchange data and looking at ER admissions. So for folks who are experiencing overdoses, and a high frequency, I suppose is the way I'll put that, how often are those folks going to the emergency room, and then showing that them engaging in local resources and engaging in the recovery process shows a drastic reduction in those ER admissions, and we're seeing good promise out of that data already. And then the striving program. So this is another one just a couple hours away in Jackson County, Missouri, but for them, they had a unique challenge wherein during COVID times, there was a big push for police officers to be able to identify social needs. It was a challenge because police officers oftentimes want to be police officers, and so it's difficult to get PD to engage in that, even though it is a good idea in theory. And so what we built was basically a website wherein if police did come on a call, they decided it was not emergent, but maybe the family was in need of something like, in some cases, new shoes for kiddos, maybe kiddos had a full diaper and there's no diapers in the house, a lot of the things that I'm sure you all see with your families. We made a very, very simple place where they could go and refer those families in for treatment. And then over here where you see Hub Agency Received Referrals, that is a listing of a bunch of the not-for-profit partners that are engaged in helping take care of these families. And so what that means is basically when those police officers or anyone in the community also has access to the public portal, they can go in, submit a family who's in need of some type of assistance, and there's a network of not-for-profit organizations that in this case are funded to sit at the table and basically wrap around these families and address those specific needs. And so thinking about referrals successfully completed, so that program also has a 68% closed-loop referral rate, which means that in that instance, 68% of the families that do opt in to have their information gathered, they do go and receive services at these organizations, which hopefully is an indication of the beginning of a life change. But another thing that's a little bit interesting about the Striving program is because it's a police-driven program, the bulk of the calls begin with the need for trauma supportive services, because often cases these are families that have been victims of drive-bys or just of gang-related shootings, things like that in the Raytown parts of Kansas City, Independence parts of Kansas City, even downtown Kansas City. And so being able to see that 2,100 of those referrals, so that's probably, if I were to wager a bet, it's probably all of the referrals, or it looks like it's about half the referrals, begin from a trauma perspective. And then you can see, basically, after their initial touch point with the program is related to trauma, you're able to conduct screeners that show what some of the other effects that they might be dealing with as a family could be. Thinking about health insurance qualification, clothing, social relationships, parenting, all kinds of different things that they're able to uncover. And then that network of nonprofits, it's a network because not all of them do trauma supportive services. Some of them do nutrition services. Some of them do supportive housing or recovery, things like that. And so it's really meant to be a starting point, and then a network of not-for-profits that come in and they wrap around these families and they address more specific needs that might also be the family might be dealing with, aside from having a loved one who may have just been shot. And then talking about artificial intelligence. So AI is showing progress and helping in a number of ways. I would say personally, the way that I use it is mostly thought prompts, but something that we've been able to do as a company with the consent of our clients, and oftentimes our clients are coming to us and they would like to do this. We're able to take the text that they input in their implementation of Community CareLink, put it into a secure server where AI has basically been deployed, and begin to take free text and tell stories with free text. And so what that means is it's almost like a thought bubble or a word cloud. If you guys have seen word clouds before, it's almost like artificial intelligence in real time building a word cloud around the most prevalent need. And then in this case, we're actually able to take it, kind of tying back to that managed care comment that I made at the beginning, or Medicaid, Medicare, private pay, whatever it might be, tying that to this MCO conversation. In often cases, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that are providing services that are Medicaid or Medicare eligible. And the reason that they're not, there's a lot of reasons they might not be taking any payer money, but a big reason that we see is the administrative burden associated with actually contracting with payers. So going through the credentialing process, submitting 837 claims in a way that aren't going to get kicked back by your payers, things like that. And that is one area where artificial intelligence has been really kind of opening the eyes of a lot of our clients who are looking for ways to diversify their funding. Because anymore, it's been talked about a little bit today, but with the changes in the federal government, it's going to get more and more difficult to fund the services that a lot of our organizations provide. And so in this case, this may or may not be, and is showing very strong promise of being a sustainable means of funding for a lot of the organizations that we work with. And we'll skip that one. But I've talked about this a little bit, but a few examples are creating a template for a grant application. So folks, is anyone in the room using ChatGPT? Yeah, it's pretty helpful. And I will say I often feel like I'm not fully utilizing it because we have like the technical side of the organization who are doing all these amazing things around product delivery, and I'm asking it to make my grocery list, literally, or a workout plan that I will probably never take it up on. But there's a number of different things, but something that's actually been extremely helpful for me because when I moved into kind of like a more business development role, I left all my Excel experience behind me, very, very voluntarily. I absolutely hate that platform, and I worked in it for years and years and years before my current role. But something that you can do with a lot of success in Excel is actually take a spreadsheet that you're having issues with, upload it to GPT, and ask it what you should do in order to make it do 1, 2, or 3 different things. And it will actually spit out for you an updated version of that Excel spreadsheet, and in often cases have those modifications done for you. So it's pretty cool. And then the bottom thing, have it knock out the tasks that you hate doing, which again for me is like building a grocery list or that workout plan that I would certainly never take it up on. And then this is just an example. So for those who've never seen the user interface of ChatGPT, this is my GPT prompt. And essentially what I wanted to do is come up with a mission statement for Community CareLink. And so in often cases what it will do is it will give you multiple options. And again, for me personally, I think AI, if we lean all in and we basically just copy paste everything that comes out of GPT, it's going to just be brain rot in the immediate future, especially for youth. I'm seeing how my nieces and nephews are using it. And it can be troubling sometimes. And so for me, what I really encourage anyone who's using it to look at it as is it's a starting point. So ask it for prompts and things like that. Even for me, if I get flustered, I have a lot of tasks, I will literally type out and say, these are all the things that I have to do today, which is therapeutic in its own right, and then have it basically consolidate kind of like a to-do list for me, and then even assign times to it, because it's going to scrape so much publicly available data, which is a little bit humbling for me sometimes, because I'll have something like I have to work on like a request for proposal, and it'll be like 20 minutes. I'm like, that takes me 70 minutes. Like, there's no way. So it can be a little bit humbling, and so often cases you do have to conversate with it a little bit and say, relax on the 20 minutes thing, I'm a little bit slower, let's move that to 70, re-aggregate my time today and tell me how I can make best use of my time. And it will give you, in most cases, a pretty thoughtful response. Yeah. But any questions? Hopefully this has been helpful. And again, I do just want to say thank you all so much for your work as community health workers. Again, I see the need in my own family and immensely grateful. So, thanks everyone.
Thank you.